So AOD endorses Tenet. One of Nolan's few truly mixed receptions from the film critics, Tenet was ambitious and original in the beige mass of Hollywood blockbuster reskinnings of previously experienced creative IPs. Tenet, being directed by Christopher Nolan, was derided. Hey, what are you still doing here? You've got a big head, haven't you? If it wasn't, it would probably be dismissed as action fluff with pretensions, that is, not a trite drama about older people around Oscar season, and then praised as original and compelling by some pathetic letterboxed cult years down the track. As it stands, I consider Tenet to be the third most impressive of Nolan's films, following The Dark Knight and Memento. I would normally place Inception third, which at its best might be superior to, maybe, Tenet still, although Inception reeks of self-aggrandizing, pompous belief in its own effectiveness, even if it admittedly is effective. Dramatically, narratively, cinematographically, Inception can be highly arrogant and smug in its confidence at dazzling the audiences of it, even if it did, and it did, at the time and still, I do suspect. Tenet is Nolan aware of what people didn't like about Inception and Interstellar, and yet he insists on some dramatic subplot with which to hang the film's metaphysical, perspective-warping plot devices on top of, as Inception's husband-wife and father-son dynamic had demonstrated, or the father-daughter angle of Interstellar, plus the motivation of Anne Hathaway's character in Interstellar, though certainly less emphasized in that picture. In this film, it is a mother and son dynamic, although more subdued and organically weaved into the plot, an appropriate or unobtrusive aside, rather than trying to tie its way into the genre components of the narrative. Tenet did display some of the more visually interesting and cinematic sci-fi or genre ideas in mainstream cinema for the 21st century, and frankly, I have no hesitation at applauding the audacity and general originality of the film. Tenet feels as though it had many scenes that over-explained or elaborated itself, cut from the finished feature. Whilst I appreciate this for a first-time cohesive viewing experience, I would love to view an extended cut after having seen the theatrical release version. Even if the film doesn't flow as seamlessly, I would just be curious as to how Nolan sees his world from a more expansive vantage, if you know what I mean. Tenet was a really interesting effort. We can poke holes, find flaws in Tenet. I'm more envious of the ambition. Frankly, in a world of insecurity, of self-doubt, a film like Tenet is welcomed. Arrogant, maybe, but more brave than almost every other mainstream film around it in the action genre context. Yes. AOD endorses Tenet. It made me like Nolan again, but then I remember Oppenheimer was the follow-up to this, and now I'm mixed on Nolan again. Maybe watching some old Nick Roeg movies is the way to go, both for me and for Nolan. Jack O'Connell or Loudon or Taron Egerton up with Harry Styles or Ed Sheeran or Lil Sims. Why not? Go fully unpredictable and disintegrate even more boundaries and barriers as the original film had. Give it a go. In a modern day take on Camel and Rogue's performance. Or a Bond film. I know Nolan's favourite is On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is to say the Bond films would be in good hands with Nolan. I do wonder at how arrogant one man can be to write The Dark Knight Rises and not just burn it up afterward, but that's okay. The early 2010s was an annoying, unfruitful, overbearing period of time for all of us, frankly. There were some good films, but 2012 Avengers was way better than 2012 Dark Knight Rises, whereas in 2008 it was Dark Knight which pissed all over Favreau's Iron Man. Interesting how things changed. The MCU films after Avengers 2012 are basically without too much excitement or even any truly major merits. Maybe 2015's also Whedon-helmed Age of Ultron was fairly decent, I could argue. Although a non-Nolan, also British spearheaded with Matt Reeves, however, Batman flick appeared last year, 2022 AD, to make up for how awful Dark Knight Rises was. May talk about it someday. Good movie, that 2022 Batman picture, despite something being in the way. That was pretty pathetic, I will state. But Twilight Pattinson is a good Bruce Wayne/Batman, well, I'll be damned, who'd have guessed. Maybe if that is possible, we can get another good Nolan film. Just stay away from those trite biopics, please. Thank you. And thank you for suffering through this.